guy, Robert Lustig, he did his research. This is 15 years old, his research. He figured out the pathway of how the body digests fructose. And so this has been, he figured out the pathway. It's been published for over 15 years, and it's been verified. And really, when it's appropriately, he titled his talk the very first time when he spoke to other doctors about it. He called it The Bitter Truth, and we're going to see why. God made sugar, so how could it possibly be bad for me? Okay, we all hear about, like, even like a lot of our EDP, what is the food stamps, and those cards, they're no longer covering fructose soft drinks or processed foods or your chips. But when I look at sugar, God made sugar, right? Isn't it, how can it be bad for me if God made everything for us to eat? So let's take a closer look at this whole picture. And God packaged it. When God made original sugar in its form, it's packaged with all the essential cofactors to digest it and to thrive, versus what we take out of the plant. We take the sugar and we take it away. We process it into foods that we enjoy, even if it's just plain straight sugar. But we've taken away all the cofactors, the fibers, the minerals that we need to digest the sugars for our body to use. So it's not sugar when we don't specify sugar. It's not what God made originally. Usually when we think of sugar, we think of the sugar outside of what God made, the fruits and vegetables. And when we look at sugar trends, we look at sugar, we see that when you take it in a natural form that God made, those sugars, and you consume just those, if you were to take all your sugars from real, live, true foods, you would only eat about 15 grams a day. And that's because with the fibers that are in the foods, you literally almost can't overeat, because there's such a sense of satiety that your fullness, that you won't overeat. But we see over time that sugar consumption has gone up with processed sugars. And then, and this is from 2007. At this point, adolescents are eating up to 72.8 grams a day of their caloric intake is from sugar. And so it's gone up, and 15% of that has come from fructose, or fructose, however you pronounce it. I pronounce it fructose. And so we're going to look at specifically fructose. Okay, so who is Robert H. Lustig? So he's a pediatric neoendocrinologist from California, and he's the one who did the research. How was fructose processed? And when he discovered it and all the implications of what he discovered, fructose by itself is not good and being processed. So let's just have a little background first. Here's regular sugar called sucrose. So sucrose is made up of two molecules, glucose and fructose, or fructose. And so both are, this is sugar, just plain sugar processed. Pure sugar like what you get in your sugar packets. It's just plain white sugar. Has no fiber with it, no coenzymes, no minerals to digest it, just plain sugar. But when you take sugar and you separate it out, you get glucose and fructose. In nature, you'll never find, or I don't say you'll never, as far as I know, in nature, you don't find fructose by itself. It's always with glucose, or you can have higher ones. But let's look, or you never find it by itself without the fibers and the minerals. Let me restate that. You don't find it without the fibers and the minerals. And so fructose, we know it's got a bad rap right now. When people talk about fructose, that's the bad carb, that's the bad sugar. And glucose is the good one. They're both processed, they're both not good. But processed, if you ate glucose versus fructose, I'm going to show you that fructose is a lot worse by itself, processed. And so sucrose, we're going to see glucose is processed by the whole body. But fructose is processed in the liver only. And how it's processed in the liver is what makes it so detrimental to our health, what kind of harm it does. And so why is glucose viewed as a good sugar? It's processed by, in general, it's processed by the whole body as well as the liver, and it produces glycogen. And so that's where we get our energy at night. So when you go to sleep, you don't have to eat through the night because glucose has been stored as glycogen in your liver and your muscles. So you're not starving in the middle of the night. You have energy to keep breathing and your heart beating and everything else to function. And so it has a positive feedback loop. When you eat glucose, it has a feedback loop where once you get full, you're going to stop. So that's a good thing. You're not going to overeat. So that's why, in general, glucose is viewed as the good sugar. And what we found out, fructose, because it's metabolically unique, it has a reputation as being the bad sugar. And so we're going to look at it. It's processed differently than glucose, and it's processed almost entirely in the liver. So the liver becomes overwhelmed with fructose, and its intake is being high. Fructose also, it affects the liver, that it drives fat production. 30%, when you eat fructose, 30% of that fructose, even if you're starving and you need that food source, it's automatically, 30% is automatically processed as liver.
My liver into fat.
It's processed, by the liver to make fat. It doesn't turn into glycogen. It's not metabolized by the cells to make energy. 30% of it automatically turns to fat. So if you want to get the energy from that 30% of fat, you've actually got to burn fat. And so that's the first thing. And we see it leads to not only does it even up someone who drinks beer or alcohol, they'll get a beer belly, but someone who drinks Cokes, because it uses the same pathway as alcohol, they'll get what looks like a beer belly, but it's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and it raises your triglycerides. So let's look a little bit more into it. So he compares fructose to ethanol, which is alcohol, and he's basically saying it's like alcohol without the buzz, because fructose doesn't affect the brain like alcohol does, but it affects the liver almost the same way. It overloads the liver, it promotes fat accumulation, it generates metabolic damage. And so fructose, it can contribute to all these things: insulin resistance, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, and type 2 diabetes. And this was 15 years ago, and it says it's associated with. A lot of the research today says it actually causes today. And so not only that, but it affects the hormones and your appetite. Fructose disrupts your hunger signals. It doesn't suppress ghrelin, your hunger hormone. So actually, when you can eat it, you don't get full. Not only that, but it causes an insulin spike. It'll actually increase your hunger. So the more you drink, the more you want more. I think about the old 8-ounce Cokes, and then they're 10 ounces and 12 ounces. And it takes till someone stops drinking a Coke, depending on the person, it's anywhere from 12 to 20 ounces till they get a full signal. So they'll overdrink and they'll overeat with fructose because it doesn't have that feedback loop. It causes leptin resistance. And so that's the hormone that tells you when you're full. So when you get that leptin resistance, you don't have that full signal like you do with eating apples. You can only eat so many apples before it stops. And your brain actually thinks you're still hungry even when you're not. And more appropriately, he would sometimes say, even though you've had fructose, your body will still think it's starving. It will still think it's hungry, even though you've eaten. You'll still have that signal. It also leads to brain addiction pathways. So it activates reward centers, same as drugs. It stimulates the nucleus accumbens, and so it's your reward center. So it creates cravings, and it's habit forming. And you ask someone to give up Coke, and they'll kind of balk at that idea. I can't give up Coke, because they have that habit forming and possibly even dependence. And so when we look at obesity in America today, we have an obesity epidemic. But if fructose, because fructose doesn't have the fiber, it's one of the major drivers. It's a processed food, it's high in fructose, low in fibers, and that leads to rapid absorption, no, how do you say the word? Satiety, and you'll have actually overconsumption, and because it's not satisfying. Versus an apple, you try to eat 4 or 5 apples, you probably can't do it. You would have to force yourself. You're going to want to stop probably after 1. So what's the big picture of all this? Eating fructose processed by itself leads into a vicious cycle, what makes you actually want more. And so then again, got fatty liver disease, insulin resistance, your appetite doesn't turn off, it actually picks up, and then you're addicted to it. And so there's this whole vicious cycle that takes place. And what's interesting is fructose, processed by itself, was done in the 1950s, really didn't enter our food like what we buy in the store until the 1980s. And we do see all of a sudden, we see fat kind of almost rising in association with how much fructose we have in our foods. And so, is processed fructose, is it as bad as alcohol? He makes this analogy because he understands how alcohol is processed by the liver. And what he blew him away is when he did the research to find out how fructose is consumed in the liver, it's almost exactly the same pathway, except it doesn't affect the brain. And so when he makes this comparison, which is kind of shocking, because which is worse for your liver, soda or alcohol?
Yes.
Okay, yes. And so we're going to look at that. And even though we're going to do a comparison right now between fructose and ethanol, in other words, alcohol, beer, wine, hard alcoholic drinks. They're different substances, but they use the same metabolic pathway. And so I'm going to put a question right here, and then you're going to, reading that question, you're going to tell me, is that a result of consuming fructose? Is that a result of B, consuming ethanol, or is it will it result in both? So here's the first question. Processed mainly by the liver. So which is that? C, both of them, yeah. Both fructose and ethanol are both processed mainly by the liver. Okay? And so we see right here, our sodas with high fructose corn syrup, beer, they both will make cirrhosis of the liver, but one we tend to call non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, but they both affect the same way. Here's another question. Turns into fat in the liver. Which do y'all think?
Both of them.
Fructose.
And it's actually both of them. So here's some of his research that he did. Remember, he's a pediatric neuroscientist, and so he was wondering, how do these little babies are always hungry and they're always craving more fructose, more drinks, more foods? And because of the way that alcohol and fructose are processed with fatty liver disease, it actually gives what we would think we call a beer belly in kids as well. Now, granted, this picture is taken with sucrose, which is regular sugar, but half of sucrose is fructose. And so eating too much sugar is still bad. Not bad as straight fructose, because it's only half fructose, but it can lead to an addiction if it's not eaten in its natural form. And so this is what he's discovered. Can cause fatty liver disease. Which one causes fatty liver disease?
Both.
Mm-hmm. Both of them. Causes intoxication, a drunk feeling.
Fructose, no.
Yeah, just ethanol. Found in soda and processed foods.
Fructose, eh?
Yep, fructose. And It's addictive, its reward pathway is activated.
Both of them.
Both of them. And so there's not much of difference. And so he points out a calorie, this is point number 5, he points out a calorie is not a calorie because when you keep calories the same, it should have the same effect on the body, but we're seeing fructose actually makes you gain weight, actually harms your metabolic system much more than in its natural form. And what they found out, this is one of his key discoveries, is when they started doing experiments where they took fructose out of the diets of children, their health actually improved just by taking fructose out. And so that was something that was discovered back then, 15 years ago. So this is interesting. If you take 2 people on day 1, same person, they eat the same thing, same body composition, work out the same, do everything the same, except this one will consume 1 Coke a year, and over here, the same person will consume water. And what happens is after 1 year, you have Cokes, because remember, no matter what, you don't have a choice. 30% of that fructose will be turned into fat. You have no choice. That's just how it's processed in those percentages. And so 30% is turned into fat. They find that a person will gain 25 to 30 pounds versus the person who's drinking water won't. And remember, they have to be exactly the same. And again, if you do it for 5 years, you're going to gain 25 to 50 pounds and over 5 years. And so today, in the past, our Cokes were made out of cane sugar. Or someone might think, oh, well, I just won't drink high fructose Cokes, with high fructose corn syrup. I'm going to go get me a Coke from Mexico. They use cane sugar. And so maybe I won't get fat. I can have my Cokes and drink them too and not get fat. But cane sugar, again, comes back to the fact that cane sugar is half fructose, and I'm going to show you, is basically high fructose corn syrup, okay? It's half this and half like glucose. You've seen the glucose tablets that people get for like diabetics when they get low. That's pure glucose. And we know this one, your body can use and burn the energy up later real easily. Versus this one, so they think, oh, I'll have a cane sugar. Well, if you're having cane sugar, half of it is high fructose corn syrup. And so they will still gain weight, but almost half as much. Instead of 15 to 25 pounds or 30 pounds, it's 13 to 18 pounds. So it's still not perfect. Processed sugar is still not perfect, but at least it's better than fructose. And so things to consider. Why might fructose be considered dangerous, even though it does not make a person feel drunk? And so there's many things you could say from that. It'll make you fat. Metabolic disease, type 2 diabetes, fatty liver, cirrhosis of the liver. And so why do people think, why do you think people consume more fructose than ethanol?
Because they don't pass out from fructose, but they pass out from being drunk.
Yeah, but do people even know how closely it's linked?
Yeah, the thing is, though, ethanol has a hard stop, whereas fructose doesn't.
Yeah, so if you get too
pass
drunk,
out, you can't drink no more, but you can always drink another Coke.
And plus, when someone is drinking alcohol and they're drunk, they lose control, all kinds of,
They have a drinking issue.
They have a drinking issue, things that happen when you drink too much. Versus you can drink as much fructose as you want, and you can still control your behavior. It's not obvious. So they're not seeing the health effects until much, much later. And then I don't think some people even understand where it's coming from. And so here we go. The invisible drink. Imagine I put 2 drinks in front of you. One is a bottle of alcohol. The other is a regular soda. If I told you that both of them go straight to your liver, both can turn to fat, and both can damage your body over time, would you still think of them in the same way?